By now you've explored the properties of color, hue, value, and intensity with acrylic paint. Now it's time to explore ways to create visual complexity in your artwork when painting. One thing to take note of is that a color will look much different painted on a white surface versus painted on something that's not a white surface. So watch this. I'm going to paint some of this blue, it's like a cerulean blue, down on just the white paper. And so this is high intensity blue because there's nothing else in it. It's just blue right out of the bottle. So a little review about color intensity. Refers to the purity of a color. Alright. Now, what if I paint the exact same blue on top of this orange? Wow, what a difference. For one thing, it looks darker. Really though, what it is less intense, so it has a lower intensity. So it's not so much the value that I've changed the intensity. I didn't mix anything into the blue, but I mixed on the paper. So in other words, the orange that was already on the paper is influencing how the blue looks to my eyes, to my brain. So that's really something to keep in mind. And that's kind of the theme of this study that I want you to work on. I want you to get used to painting in layers using undercolors and top colors. Here's an example. This is a portrait of Louis Armstrong, the great jazz trumpeter. If we look at a close-up of this painting, you should be able to see that this green, super light value of green, is not brushed right on top of the white of the paper. It's actually brushed on top of a very light valued red, almost like a rose color. And if you look at the way Louis' skin was painted, you'll see that it's not just one color. There's multiple colors layered. So we definitely see oranges, but we see oranges layered on top of that red undercolor. And here we see the orange layered on top of some olive green. We see red violet that was layered on top of the orange. So it's all about layers. If we look down at the bottom of the painting, we can see that Louis' suit jacket is, well, it looks black, but really it's not black. It's actually black brushed on top of green, which was brushed on top of my undercolor of the rose color. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and then you are going to experiment with that yourself. Once again, you're going to need some spectrum boxes. Now remember, we're using the dimensions 3 centimeters by 3 centimeters by 21 centimeters. And then you have 3 centimeter increments, which will give you 7 sections. So make yourself one of those. Then in the first box of spectrum row A, I'll label this A so you know what I'm referring to, make a doodle. Any kind of doodle. So I've drawn the motif of a star. To work on this study, I want you to pick at least one color scheme. Now to do this, make sure you reference the color scheme lesson. There's a great video to watch on color schemes. Here's a fancy color wheel that has a color scheme picker. I'm going to use a triadic color scheme. So I'm going to use 3 colors that are equal distance apart. I'm going to use blue violet, and then I'm going to move along the color wheel 1, 2, 3, 4 spots. So my next color is red orange. I'm going to write them down over here. So my first color is blue violet, so that's a tertiary color. My second color, red orange, and that's another tertiary color. And then I go another 4 spots. 1, 2, 3, 4. My third color is going to be yellow green. Now let's pretend I'm actually doing a painting, and that's my color scheme. So the first thing I would do is I would lay down an undercolor over my entire drawing, and I would use one of these 3 colors. So I am going to use blue violet. Now another quick review about intensity, and I want you to try this too. There's various ways to change the intensity of a color. One way is to add white, but there's actually 2 different ways to add white. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to go to my palette here. Now remember, my undercolor is supposed to be blue violet, so I'm going to grab some blue, and I'm going to grab some red, because blue and red make violet, but I'm supposed to be making blue violet. So I'm going to take a little bit more blue than red. So it's all about ratio. Okay. Now I've been mixing with this brush, so I'm just going to wipe a little bit of paint off of it. Now I'm going to add white. So that's one way to change the intensity of a color. Add white paint to the color. Now I'm going to paint that down in box 2 actually. So you should do the same. You might have to pause this video and choose your color scheme so that you have a set of colors to work from, like I do. Try to have at least 2 or 3 colors. So 2 colors would come from a complementary color scheme. So for instance, if you use the color orange, what's the complementary color of orange? It's the color that's right across from it on the color wheel, blue. So that could be a color scheme, those 2 colors. Or you could use yellow-orange, and the complementary color would be blue-violet. Tertiary colors have complements too. So you might have to pause this video, choose your color scheme, and then come back and paint along with me. But I'm painting my low-intensity blue-violet in square 2. So that color is not as intense as it would be if it did not have white in it. I'm going to wash out my brush. So I have my container of water. I'm going to dry the bristles. I'm going to go back to my palette. I'm going to make a little bit more of that blue violet because I didn't make enough earlier. Here, I'll try to mix in the camera. Okay, so blue, red, but thinking about ratio, I want to use more blue than red. I'm being careful to avoid that puddle of blue violet with white in it. I don't want to contaminate this. I want it to just be pure blue violet. Okay, but now I'm going to clean out my brush, because here's the second way that you can add white to a color. You can use the whiteness of the paper. So a little review about medium. So matte medium is acrylic paint without pigment, essentially. And this is what we use to thin out acrylic paint instead of water. So I'm going to make sure I don't have too much paint in the bristles of my brush. I have some medium squeezed out on my palette. I'm going to get my pure blue violet. I'm going to mix it with some medium. And then I'm going to paint in box 1. Now I asked you to draw a motif in box 1 as just as a way to make sure you're not putting the paint down too thick. So what you're doing here is you're controlling the opacity of the paint. So if you can't see your drawing anymore, you have put the paint on way too opaque, way too thick. So you have to thin out the paint with medium. So that's 2 methods. You use the whiteness of the paper, or you actually add white. But you can change the intensity of a color by adding white. Another very popular way to change the intensity of a color is to add its color complement. What is the color complement of blue violet? Remember, blue violet is my undercolor. the color right across from it on the color wheel is yellow-orange. Okay, so I have to make some yellow-orange somewhere on my palette. Hopefully I have enough room. So yellow-orange. So I take some yellow and I take some red, because yellow and red make orange. But it's supposed to be yellow-orange, and so I use more yellow than red to make it more on the yellow side of orange. Okay, so now I've got that, but my brush has all that color in it, so I wash it out. Now I need my blue violet, because I want to paint the rest of my boxes in spectrum box A, row A. I want to paint the rest of them blue violet, but I want it to be a low intensity blue violet. So blue plus red equals violet, but ratio, I need more blue than violet. Okay, and now that's really dark. I want to lower the intensity of it by mixing in some of its color complement, which is actually yellow-orange. I'm wiping out some of the excess paint from my brush. Okay, so I'm going to use a little bit of medium to help it flow. Wow, that's really low intensity. That's almost to the point where it's like a gray. Well, that's okay. So I'm painting the rest of the boxes. You know what I'm going to do though? I changed my mind. I'm going to add a little bit more like pure blue violet to box 3. Because I'm just experimenting, I'm just playing. So there, so my box 3 has blue violet that's not that low of intensity, but then box 4 has that low intensity blue violet, and so does box 5, 6, and 7. So you might want to do the same. Just maybe experiment with how low you take that intensity of your undercolor. So that's your undercolor. Okay, so there's my color scheme again, written down there. So I've used the blue violet from it. I'll check it off. I've used the blue violet as my undercolor. And now I need to let that dry. Now the nice thing about acrylic paint is it dries really fast, but if you have a hair dryer, you could give it a shot of warm air, and that's going to dry really fast. My underpainting is dry now, so what I want to do is I want to experiment with my other 2 colors. So let's go get some red-orange. So I'm going to mix up some red-orange. So I can do this in a couple different ways. Look, I actually have some orange paint. So what if I just took some red and added it to my orange? Well, that's going to give me red-orange, right? Yeah, of course. Now remember, when you mix with the brush, sometimes you have an excess amount of paint on your brush. You don't want to have a big a brush full of goopy paint when you go to your painting. Now, the whole point of using undercolors, as I was pointing out with this Louis Armstrong painting, is to let them show through. There's no point having an undercolor if you're just going to cover it up. So I'm going to paint now in box 3 with my red-orange, but my goal is to allow the undercolor to show through. So how could I do that? Well, one way is to do what I'm doing now, is just not to have too much paint on the bristles of my brush. So that's one way. I'm going to go ahead and paint in box 4 now with the same color, and I'll show you the second way to allow that undercolor to show through, and that's to use medium. So by using some medium, thinning out my paint, I can allow that undercolor to show through. And when we use really thin layers of acrylic paint, that's called glazing. So, but what I'm taking note of here is the difference between those 2 squares. And I mean, there's lots, I've changed quite a few variables. Like, so for instance, this undercolor was quite pure, blue violet. This one was much lower in intensity. And then, well, I suppose the opacity of the paint is about the same. Maybe I put this red-orange on a little bit thinner. Okay. But you know, they look a little bit different, right? But I think the reason they look different is mainly because of the undercolor. Now, you as the artist have to decide how much of the undercolor you want to cover or to show through. And of course, you know, you do that as the artist. How about yellow-green? That's a third color of mine. So, I bet yellow-green isn't going to look too great on that version of my undercolor. So knowing that, I might have to put it on a little thicker. So I have this yellow, it's kind of a warm yellow. So there's I'm mixing my yellow-green, which is a tertiary color. Okay, and I'll just wipe a little bit of that paint off. Now I'm going to go to my box 5 and paint it on top, paint my yellow-green on top of my undercolor. That looks pretty nice. Don't mind that. Now remember what I said at the beginning of the video. A color is going to look a lot different painted on white paper, look at that, than it will be down on an undercolor. So here's a good example. Sometimes you might want that look. You might want a color to look really vibrant, pure, intense, and so you're going to want to use a light undercolor, or maybe no undercolor. Like maybe white is your undercolor. So that's something to think about. So I've already used all the colors from my color scheme. Artists use color schemes to create unity, or to maintain unity, to help build a sense of togetherness and connectedness in their artwork. And so they stick to a color scheme. Here's an example of a painting that was done with colored pencil. Whoa, that sounds funny to say that. But yeah, I mean, if you think about it, whenever we work with color, it's like a painting. Here's another one. This one's done with faded markers. But you can see that I use the same colors throughout. So that's an example of a color scheme. And that builds a sense of unity and togetherness. So that's colored pencil and my color scheme. Actually, this is a complementary color scheme. So I used red and the color complement, green. But when I was doing it, I lowered the intensity of my red and green. And then this is the same thing, but I kind of deviated and I used this sort of taupey beige color as kind of a freebie color. It kind of, you know, it can go with red and green and gray too. Gray is one of those colors that can go with really any color scheme. So that being said, why don't you experiment with that? So look, let's go back to our palette here and let's make some gray by mixing white and black. Whoa, I didn't wash my brush out very well, so it has some of that yellow-green still in it, but that's okay. That actually would work really well with my color scheme. What if I made a gray, but I made it so that it had a little bit of that yellow-green in it? Thank you. So that it creates unity with my color scheme. So I'm going to paint that down on top of that undercolor. Look at that. Now I put that on pretty opaque, but it's okay. I can still see evidence of my undercolor. And you know, I mean, it's not wrong to completely cover the undercolor. I know I said earlier that, you know, what's the point of having an undercolor if you don't let it show through? That's true, but on the other hand, there might be some parts of your painting where, yeah, you just totally cover it up. Or you might use a third layer. Let's experiment with that too. Okay, but one step at a time. Let's just take that gray in. I like how that turned out on top of that blue violet. So please keep that in mind when you're working on your artwork, any artwork, that you can use colors like gray, black, and white because, well, they're not really colors. They're more like values. So you can use them in combination with your color scheme. You know, so there's my color scheme, but I can still use gray, black, and white with those colors. Let me zoom out a little bit. Let's go back to one of these squares that's dry. Like, okay, this one. So this was fairly intense blue-violet first as an undercolor, then red-orange as a top color. Now what if I took my third color from my color scheme, yellow-green, and put it on top as a third layer? But how about I'm on my palette, I'm going to use this gray that was kind of green, like a greeny gray, and I'm going to get some more yellow green and just add it to that. So now this is like a pretty low intensity yellow green because there's like so much gray in it. But I'm going to put that on as a third layer. I'm getting a little bit of medium here in my brush because I want to make sure that I don't cover up. Ooh, that's a lot. So I'm going to wipe off my brush a little bit, and I'm just going to get pure medium now, and I'm going to use the pure medium to distribute the paint that's already on the paper. I don't know, maybe I didn't let that red orange dry enough because I made a bit of a mess there. So if that happens to you when you're using acrylic, don't panic. Acrylic's very like forgivable. Like you can just what I'll do is I'll let that dry, and then I'll go back and I'll add another layer of my green gray on top of that. But right now I'm getting a funny texture, so I just have to be patient and let that dry. Okay, but the point I'm trying to make is that you can use more than 2 layers. You can go 3 layers or 4 layers or whatever. But the bottom line is you want to stick to your color scheme. So I have one more box left, and so what could I do here? Well, I could... Maybe some of you are wondering, like, okay, blue violet is my undercolor. Can I use blue violet again as a top color? Well, I mean, you always want to have some contrast between your undercolor and your top color so that it's obvious that you have 2 colors. So to create some contrast, what I could do is I could use a different type of blue with my same red and make like a different blue violet. Oh yeah, that's much different because the blue was different. So remember when you were exploring the property of color hue, you learned that hue is the name of a color, and blue is a hue, yeah, but then there's so many different varieties of blue, and they all have like special names. So this would be like cerulean blue. So I'm using cerulean blue now with cadmium red, and now I have a completely different blue violet, and now I can paint this new blue violet on top of my original blue violet. Maybe I'll add a little bit of white to it. So I'll lighten the value. Value is another property of color. And so now I'm making a lighter value of blue violet, and I'm going to paint it on top of my initial blue violet. I want it even lighter. Sometimes you don't really know if the value that you've mixed on your palette is like the right value until you put that color down on the paper, down on your painting, and then you see. So I think that's one of the fun things about art, is you're always responding to what you see taking shape right before your eyes and making decisions and solving problems, and that's the fun of it. This is dry now. That box 3 that I wasn't happy with is dry. So I go to my water container, I wash out my brush, I go back to my palette where I had that green gray, and I add it on top. There we go. So that has 3 layers on it now. My initial pure, or fairly pure intensity blue violet, then I covered it with red orange, which is another color from my color scheme, and then now I put a 3rd layer of like a yellow green, but it's a yellow green with quite a bit of gray in it. So that's what I want you to do. I want you to pick a color scheme and experiment with undercolor and top color, play with changing the intensity, and there's nothing wrong with going on to another row. You know, like I've only done 7 here, and I mean I could keep going and have fun, but I don't want to bore you. I don't want to make too long of a video. But you know, you should keep going if you feel like you need to experiment more, okay? Because this is getting you ready for the painting that you're going to do, because you're going to have to choose a color scheme for your painting and then use it to complete the painting, but you're going to have to change the intensity and the value and the hue of your colors from your color scheme. So experiment with that, have fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with all this acrylic paint knowledge. Have fun.